Welcome, everyone, to Pathways Through the Orchard. This week's Torah portion is Tzav. It is the second portion in the book of Leviticus, Vayikra. And in great measure, it goes over much of the material of the first Torah portion of Vayikra, which deals almost exclusively with the offerings that would be brought in the Mishkan, the Tabernacle, and later in the temple. The sacrificial service that later, after the temples were destroyed, the sages took all of the basic ideas and principles of these offerings and translated them into the prayers that we have today in the Beit Knesset, in the synagogue, the communal prayers that we have. So this week's Parsha, Tzav, means to command. So it begins by God telling Moshe that he should command Aharon and his sons about the offerings. So even though this Torah portion goes over all of the offerings that were already explained, in the portion of Vayikra, it's from the perspective of the people bringing the offerings, whereas in this portion, it's more about the communal aspect of some of these same offerings, and specifically the role that the Kohanim have in bringing these sacrifices. So these two parshas really go together, and they complement each other in the information that they're giving over. So in the first number of verses, the word fire, Eish, is repeated a number of times. And so even in the second verse, it talks about bringing the Ola offering. This is called the elevation offering. And this was a communal offering that was brought every day. That's where we get Shachrit from. And it says that there'll be a fire on the Mizbeach that will be burning. Later it mentions fire again, and then it says, V'ha'esh ala Mizbeach tukadbo lo tichbeh. The fire that is on the altar, it will be burning there, do not put it out. And then later it says, again, the same idea, but with different emphasis, where it says, Eish tamid tukad al Mizbeach lo tichbeh. A ongoing fire, a continual fire will be burning on the Mizbeach. Don't put it out. So on the simple understanding, there's two mitzvahs here. One is to have a fire on the Mizbeach, and that it should burn continually. And a second mitzvah of not putting it out, a positive and a prohibitive mitzvah with fire. On the practical level, there were actually three fires on the altar. This is the altar that was in the courtyard where the sacrifices were brought. There was an inner altar within the sanctuary itself, and that was exclusively for burning the incense. But the altar we're talking about here is the outside altar, and there were daily communal offerings and private offerings. That is what these two parshas are about, Vayikra and Tzav. But as mentioned before, all of these animal sacrifices, which might seem very, very far away from our experience, the principles and the ideas were all made part of our prayers today. In fact, the sages say that prayer has replaced these sacrifices. So back to the three fires burning on the altar. There was one fire where the parts of the animal to be sacrificed were burnt on the altar. The second fire was a fire that was burning, that they would take from that fire the logs and add it to the bigger fire when needed. And a third fire was to make coals, and that was part of the incense offering. They would take from those coals in order to burn the incense. And the amazing thing is, we're told that in the Mishkan and the first temple, however we understand it, there was a fire coming from heaven, but at the same time, we still had to do our part by lighting a fire from below. In the second temple, we're told that the fire from above no longer was present, but still we kept the fire going. And when it says, Eish tamid tukar al mizbeach lo tichbeh, a continual fire should burn on the altar, do not let it go out, it is meant quite literally that the fire went for hundreds of years with no interruption. They would continually offer wood on the altar, and every morning the Kohanim, and that's part of the first verses in this parsha, they would clear the ash away in order that the fire could, in a healthy way, continue to burn. That was actually the first service of the morning, was to clear the fire from the day before so that it could burn in a very, very efficient way. So this idea of a continual fire was actually not just symbolically, it was quite literal. But what we want to understand, and that is what the class will be about tonight, is the role of fire in the Mishkan, the Tabernacle, and the Temple, and its deeper meanings. So, first of all of the offerings in Hebrew were called fire offerings, from the word eish. And since that was the service, it was to burn different parts of animals or flour offerings on the Mizbech. And this was the service of our coming close to Hashem. As discussed in Parshat Vayikra, the word for sacrifice is karban, from the word to come close, lekarev. And so this was the way of coming close. Now, the offerings without the proper intent would be hollow, would be empty of true meaning. All the sacrifices, whether they were guilt offerings or sin offerings or elevation offerings or peace offerings or thanksgiving offerings, all had to be accompanied by the right frame of mind. And if not, they simply became rote and routine and were empty of meaning. So the idea of fire on the altar represents the soul. The soul in Jewish tradition, literature, is always compared to fire. Just like a fire burns upwards, the soul is always longing to return to God, to return to its primordial source, and it's to its very essence. So the essence of the soul is compared to fire. in throughout Jewish history. And so the sacrifices are a physical, symbolic manner of expressing the longing of the soul to be close to God. And so this became the essence of the service, had to do very much with fire, as we will see as we continue this class. In the Parsha of Vayakhel, towards the end of the book of Shemot, Exodus, where we're told that before Moshe commands the people to make the Mishkan, first there's a little passage about Shabbat and the importance of keeping the Shabbat. And from there we learn two things. One is that the work of the construction of the tabernacle does not override Shabbat. Shabbat is of supreme importance. And then it says, don't kindle a fire on Shabbat. And that is only one of two specifics of Shabbat that the Torah tells us. The rest is from the oral tradition. The other one is not going outside of a certain boundary on Shabbat. In other words, not to travel too far away on Shabbat. But the most classic one is lighting a fire on Shabbat. And we also learned the juxtaposition of the warning to keep Shabbat and not desecrate Shabbat and to not kindle a fire is juxtaposed to the workings of the Mishkan. And from that, the sages learn that the very creative works that went into the building of the Mishkan are the very things that were forbidden to do on Shabbat. But the only one pointed out here is fire. So fire comes to represent all of the work of the Mishkan. And the work of the Mishkan was done, what was called a free will offering. They collected all of the materials and the gold and the silver and the copper and all of the cloth materials, excuse me, and wood that would be needed to construct. But the main symbol of creative work is fire. And that's why that's the only one that is pointed out in Shabbat, is not to kindle a fire. So here we see a very intrinsic connection between Shabbat, creative work, and fire. Now, we're not allowed to light a fire on Shabbat, but interesting, the word Shabbat itself begins with a shin, which is the letter of fire. The word for fire in Hebrew is esh, an aleph, and a shin. And even the shape of the shin has three prongs, and they're envisioned as three flames. So Shabbat, its first letter is fire, but here it's the fire of the soul, the fire of spirituality, of spiritual longing and passion. And so we're told further that the Mishkan, the tabernacle, and later the temple, was a microcosm of the macrocosm. Every detail of the Mishkan had symbolic meaning with the universe as a whole. And even deeper has to do with creation itself. And so we see that in the first word of the Torah, Bereshit, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. So in the word Bereshit, when you permute the letters, is Brit Esh, a covenant of fire. And the first thing that's created is heaven, which begins with the letter Shin. So fire is intrinsic, is essential to our understanding of creation. And also in modern physics, where it's explained that after the Big Bang, the universe was so hot, physicists call it exquisitely hot. It was so hot, even atoms or molecules couldn't form. It was like pure spiritual plasma that even atoms couldn't form. And then as the universe expanded and began to cool, then atoms, molecules, elements began to form. So fire, we're just making a connection here now. The fire of the service in the temple, the fire of creation, the fire of the soul, and that the essence of the service in the temple had to do with fire. So having said that, we're going to expand it, that the Torah itself is compared to fire. The Zohar tells us that the Torah is black fire on white fire. And this is symbolized by the parchment of the Torah is white, and the letters are black. And that is the simple understanding of black fire on white fire. So the whole Torah is fire. At the giving of the Torah, we're told that there was fire on the mountain, and that this fire created smoke, in Hebrew, ashan. And we're told that the three letters of smoke, ashan, the ayin is olam, which means space, world. Olam means world, which means space. The shin of ashan is shana, year, but it means time. And the nun of ashan means nefesh, consciousness. And so we're told that at the giving of the Torah, all the dimensions merged together, and people had what's called synesthesia, had an experience of the crossing of the senses. And we're further told that the seven heavens opened up, and what people could perceive was really a once in a history revelation of godliness. But it came through fire. And the Torah itself that was given is compared to fire. We're also told that God commanded Moshe to tell the people that the way they did a census in those days, and part of the way that they collected money for the Mishkan, was everyone gave a half shekel. A half shekel. And the Midrash tells us that Moshe couldn't understand this half shekel. What it meant is he didn't understand the deeper meanings, the symbolism of a half a shekel. And so the Midrash says that God showed him a half a shekel in fire. In other words, he clarified, just like fire purifies from the dross of metals, burns off the impurities. So showing Moshe a half shekel of fire symbolizes that he clarified for Moshe why a half a shekel. How could that atone for the people? Because when it was commanded, it was also explained that this half shekel is an atonement for the people. And further, that the same thing is when Moshe was commanded to build the menorah. And if you look, the menorah has many, many details of how it would be constructed. And again, it says Moshe couldn't understand the deeper meanings of the menorah and even how to construct it, because it was constructed out of one block of gold. And so again, the Midrash says that God showed him the model of the menorah in fire. And in fact, there's a Midrash says that God said, in a sense, don't worry about building it. Just throw this block of gold, a huge block of gold, into fire, and the menorah just formed itself. So all of these different traditions are connected to fire. And so, of course, the whole Mishkan, the whole temple, was part of the Torah, a very big part. And in fact, today, of the 613 mitzvot that are commanded, we only do approximately a third of them, because 2/3 of them had to do with the service in the temple, and as we explained, was replaced by the prayers of today, and had to do with the service of the Kohanim and the Leviim, had to do with the Sanhedrin, the high court, which was adjacent to the temple, and different mitzvot that are connected to the land of Israel. And so today we only keep approximately a third of the mitzvot that are commanded in the Torah. That's how important the temple and the service is to us. And that's why it's so important to learn the deeper meanings, which hopefully we're doing partly right now. Okay, now in the tractate of Yoma, which I'm going to open up now, on page 21b, there is a lengthy discussion about a Mishnah in Pirkei Avot that lists 10 different miracles that happened in the temple. 10 miraculous ongoing events that were happening in the temple and the temple service. And then there's a whole long discussion about why wasn't the other traditions, that there are actually seemingly more than 10 miracles happening. And so there's a discussion why this was included and not that included. And as part of that whole discussion, there is a discussion about a related tradition that there are 6 different types of fire. As we'll see, one of them is connected to the fire on the altar. That's why it's brought in this whole discussion about the miracles of the temple. Later, they discuss the idea that fire from heaven was not necessarily natural, and also the tradition that the smoke that rose from the fire on the altar rose in a straight column, and all the winds in the world and all the rain in the world could not move this pillar of smoke. So in the context of a whole discussion about which miracles and how many miracles, there is a discussion about 6 different types of fire. And so I'm going to go through them right now, and with the explanation. So first it says like this: Yesh eish ochelet ve'enu shoteh. There's a type of fire that eats but doesn't drink. Ha didan. This is our fire, the ordinary natural fire that we relate to, that we can make, meaning that it consumes solids but not liquids. In other words, it eats, but it doesn't drink. And that's why fire in our world, if you pour water on it, it will put it out. Without the water, it will burn. So that's what's called it eats but doesn't drink. That's the first type of fire. The second one is shoteh ve'enu ochelet. It drinks, but it doesn't eat. Now, that's an interesting concept about fire. So what does it relate to? So they say this is the fire of a fever. That when a person has a fever, they want and need to drink, but they have no appetite. And they just don't feel like eating. So that's called a fire that drinks but doesn't eat. The third type that is brought in the Talmud is ochelet v'shoteh. It eats and drinks. So what's the example of a fire that eats and drinks? So this, they say, the Eliyahu. This is the fire of Elijah the prophet. What are they referring to? This is when the Achav and Isabel wanted to, the king and queen of Israel, of the northern kingdom, they introduced the foreign idol worship of Baal, especially through the queen. And it spread in Israel. And then the king and queen were trying to kill all of the prophets. And so Elijah, in a somewhat desperate move, trying to steer the people away from idol worship, called for what I'm calling a contest of the gods. He set up a plan where they would build an altar on Mount Carmel near Haifa, today's Haifa, and the 400 priests of Baal would try to bring fire down from heaven and consume the offering. They brought an offering. That was the contest. Elijah said, whoever can bring fire from heaven to consume the sacrifice, that will prove to the people who the real God is. And he let the 400 priests from Baal go first. And all day long, they're doing incantations and all kinds of whatever they do to try to bring fire down from heaven. It was getting late in the day, and Eliyahu said, okay, I have to have my chance. And it was at mincha time. And so it says that Eliyahu, to prove even stronger who God was, he took water and poured it over the altar, a huge amount of water. And so the whole altar, the animal on the altar, and all around was soaked. And then he prayed a short prayer, and fire came down from heaven, and it consumed the sacrifice and all of the water. So that is what the Talmud is referring to, saying that there's a type of fire that ochelet v'shoteh, eats and drinks. And when the people saw this, they spontaneously called out, Hashem hu ha'elokim. Hashem, Yudke Vavke, hu ha'elokim. And that's a very, very important statement. That was the source of it. That's how we end Yom Kippur. We say, at the end of Nila, we say Shema one time. We say Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto Le'olam Va'ed 3 times. And then Hashem, Hu HaElokim 7 times. That's the pinnacle of Yom Kippur. The fourth fire that the Gemara talks about is Ochelet Lachin Kiyaveshin. It eats moist articles just like dry ones. So what is this referring to? This is the fire of the altar. This is called the fire of the altar. But what is moist on the altar? The animal itself. The animal is like a human being is 90% water. The animal is 90% water. But the fire on the altar consumes wet like it does dry. The fifth type of fire they bring is yesh, esh, doche esh. There's a type of fire that pushes away another fire. So what kind of fire is this? So they say this is the fire of Gavriel, the angel Gavriel. What is it talking about? So this is talking about, one second. This is when Nebuchadnezzar demanded that Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah worship idols and bow down to him, and they refused. And he threw them in a fiery furnace. And according to tradition, Gavriel came, and his fire, Gavriel is the language of Gevura, which is on the left side of the Sefirot, and is connected with fire. The right side of the Sefirot is connected to water. The left side is fire. One of the Sefirot on the left side is Gevura, and this is the connection to the angel Gavriel. So it says that God sent the angel Gavriel, and his fire pushed away the fire of the fiery furnace. And these three holy tzaddikim came out of the fire unscathed. So that's the fifth type of fire, a fire that pushes away another fire. And the last one is the Shekhinah, God's divine presence. And that we already spoke about a little bit with the Torah was given in fire. God came down on Har Sinai in fire. And later in the Torah, God is described as a consuming fire, an all-consuming fire. So these are the 6 different fires. And one of them that we discuss here is the fire on the altar. Now, I want to take this idea and introduce a very, very deep concept, because we said in the beginning that fire represents all of the service in the temple. Fire represents prayer. Fire represents the longing and the passion of the soul to be one with God, to be close to God, to cling to God, devekut, to cling to God. So there is a way to see that all the different elements of the temple and the Mishkan, that they're all connected to fire in one way or another. And these, we just went through 6 different types of fire. And we know that there are 5 levels of the soul. Now, the 6th fire, that is the fire of the Shekhinah, a godly fire. So I'm presenting to you a way to look at the temple, the Mishkan, and to see that there are 6 different fires here. What I didn't have time to do, and I hope to be able to do, is I haven't arranged this according to the exact 6 fires that we're talking about. But in a minute, we're going to see what Rav Ginsburg does with these 6 fires. But first, we're going to start with the nefesh. The nefesh is called the animal soul, the part of the soul most connected to the body. And so this is connected to the altar, the fire of the altar. Why? Because we offer up animal sacrifices. And one of the symbolisms, even today in prayer, is that we are attempting to offer up, to refine, rectify, elevate our animal soul so that it becomes a partner with our higher levels of soul. And so the sacrifices, the offerings on the altar represent this kind of offering of the soul. And so the nefesh is connected to the mizbeach, to the altar. Then we go in, remember the altar is in the outside courtyard. In the sanctuary, we have, the next one is another altar. That's the altar of the ketoret, of the incense. And this relates to the ruach. It relates to the ruach because the effect of the ketoret was to create a smell. The incense made smoke, and it made this incredibly pleasant, spiritual, even mystical smell. Now, if you'll notice that the word ruach, the second level of soul, spirit, connected to the emotions, is connected to the word reach. Reach means smell. So the ruach is connected to the ketoret. And how do we get the smell of the ketoret? Is through fire. They brought coals from the altar. Remember, that was one of the 3 fires on the altar. And they put the incense on the coals, and the coals created the smoke, which created this incredible smell. Then in the sanctuary, in the Mishkan, we have the table of showbread, where there were 12 loaves of bread, which were brought every week, and they were there the whole week, and then they were replaced with 12 new breads, and the Kohanim ate the old breads. Now, we would think they would eat the new breads, but the idea was that there was always 12 loaves of bread. And we're told by tradition that when they took the 6 loaves of bread off of the table that were there all week, they were still as fresh as the new ones being put on it. So how is fire connected? We make bread through baking it, through fire. That's how we make bread. So this is connected to the fire of the neshama. So we'd ask, why the neshama? The neshama is connected to the intellect. And so we have 2 phrases or 2 traditions that will connect the neshama to the showbread. One is, it says that a baby doesn't say Ima and Abba, doesn't say mommy and daddy until it's eaten wheat. Until it's eaten wheat. And so this means that a child doesn't have the intellect, hasn't figured out how to talk until it's eaten wheat. But wheat, no one eats kernels of wheat, especially a baby. They eat either bread or cake or crackers or something that is baked with fire. And so here, the fire of the neshama is connected to bread. And we know this in another way in Pirkei Avot. Im ein kemach, ein Torah. If there's no flour, there's no Torah. And I remember in a previous class, we asked, why doesn't it say if there's no bread, there's no Torah? And it was pointed out that people don't eat flour either, just like they don't eat hard kernels of wheat that would break our teeth. People don't eat flour either. We bake it. We add water and sometimes other ingredients, and we make bread or cake or crackers or matzah, just bread and water. And so if there's no flour, there's no Torah. And if there's no Torah, there's no flour. So here it connects because we learn the Torah through our intellect. Then we have the menorah. The menorah, of course, is connected to fire because it's lit every day. Seven flames of the menorah. And here, this is connected to the chaya of the soul. Chaya comes from the word chai. And we're told that the first three levels of soul, nefesh, ruach, and neshama, are what we'll call more normative levels of the soul, more present. The two highest levels of soul, chaya and yechida, are called surrounding energies. They are very present, but they're more elusive. They're more surrounding our whole being. And so the light of the menorah, anyone who's looked at the candle, so the halo that comes out, that's like the chaya. That's like the surrounding light, the chaya and the yechida. And then the fifth level of soul, the yechida. So this is represented by the Holy of Holies. So if you've noticed, we started on the outside, the altar, then we went into the sanctuary, and we discussed the three parts of the sanctuary: the altar of the incense, the showbread table, and the menorah, the candelabra. Now we're going within the Holy of Holies, the most inner sanctum of the sanctuary. So how is this connected to fire? So we're told that the Kohen Gadol only went in once a year, and he went in with coals from the outside altar, with incense from the inner altar, and went into the Holy of Holies until the smoke filled the entire Holy of Holies. So this is the fire of the yechida. Yechida means just one. It means unique, the unique part of the soul. The yechida, and this is connected to the unique part of the service of the temple that's only done once a year. So that's an obvious connection to the yechida. And then we have just like we said, the sixth fire is the fire of the Shekhinah. And the word Mishkan itself is the root of Shekhinah. Mishkan means to dwell, Shochen. And so the tradition is that in the Mishkan, in the first temple, was the ongoing presence of the Shekhinah. And that is the sixth fire. That's the all-consuming fire, the overriding context of all of our service, all of our longing to be close to God is to connect to this fire, to this all-consuming fire. So that was a very, very profound way to see how fire is connected to every level of the soul and to every level of the physical makeup of the Mishkan and the temple and the actual service of each of these elements. And now to conclude, I want to bring the Torah from Rav Ginsburg. In his book, Sod Hashem L'Reyav, he has a chapter, an entire chapter called Shesh Eshoten. There are 6 fires, obviously based on the Gemara that we just went over in Yoma 21b. He reveals very, very deep aspects of these 6 fires. The one that I want to bring for you tonight is, we already established, and we've actually talked about it for a number of weeks in this series of Pathways Through the Orchard, the connection of the Mishkan and creation. And the Mishkan is the microcosm of the macrocosm. And here we're talking about not just this world, but all of the worlds, all of creation. And we know, according to Kabbalah, the classic idea is that there are 4 worlds. And then the Arizal revealed really a 5th world. But he also revealed what came before the world, how God had to contract his infinite being and to create what's called the vacuum, the Chalala Panui, a space in which creation, finite creation, could even happen. And into that empty space, God shone a light called a kav, a line of light into the empty space. And this line of light is spoken about today as the Big Bang. And from that comes everything that we experience as this universe. But this universe is only the physical universe. There are other parallel worlds happening. That's a big thing in physics today. Parallel worlds, parallel universes. But this is a Kabbalistic idea that we've always known, that there are other spiritual worlds that are complementary, that are parallel to our worlds. In fact, in our prayers every day, we talk about the angels praising God. Well, this is in a different world, but it's parallel to ours and it can be experienced in our world. So Rav Ginsburg takes the ideas that I just talked about the 4 worlds, and then the 5th world, and then even before the ray of light, and he corresponds them to these 6 fires. And obviously they have deep Kabbalistic understandings, but I'm just going to go through simply Rav Ginsburg's correspondence to these 6 fires and how they relate to the creation of all of the universes. So we're going to start from, we'll call it above, and that is the kav, this ray of light. Well, this ray of light is obviously connected also to fire. All of creation, that's what we said, Brit Eish, the word Bereshit is Brit Eish, a covenant of fire. And so he corresponds, this Kav, to the fire of the Shekhinah, of God's presence. And that is the tradition, that this ray of light brought the infinite light of God into the finite worlds. And that infinite light can still be accessed, but it's called the Ora Ganuz. It was hidden away. It's there and it can be accessed, but it's just not immediately perceived. And so this initial ray of light, this is the fire of the Shekhinah. Then we're told Kabbalistically that this fifth highest world that the Arizal really revealed, which is called Adam Kadmon, primordial man. This is not exactly, it's connected, but it's not exactly what we call Adam Arishon, the first man. Adam Kadmon is what we might refer to as the DNA of all creation. In other words, this DNA and this level called Adam Kadmon attaches itself to the Kav, and it is the plan, it is the program, the DNA of everything that will be created. So Rav Ginsburg connects this to the fire of Gavriel, fire pushing off fire. And this is my explanation, is we know that we have a dualistic world, a world of duality. That's why the first letter in the Torah is a big bet, which means two. And all of creation is a balance of opposites. That's everywhere we look, everything we experience is a balance of opposites. And that's what the verse says, Zeh le'umat zeh asa Elokim. This against this did God create. And so part of the DNA of all of creation and our experience of creation is this idea of fire pushing off, meaning a balance of fire and fire. Later, that fire becomes fire and water. That's why the two sides of the Sfirot are fire and water. And that's why we saw in all of these fires, there's the fire that eats and a fire that drinks, and some that eat and don't drink, some that drink and don't eat. There's this balance. But on the highest level, it's, in a sense, all fire. And that's connected to the fire of Gavriel. And then we have the creation of the four worlds. Atzilut is the world of emanation. That is the highest world. And that's called the fire of the altar. There's a concept in Kabbalah that the highest levels always will manifest in the lowest level. The idea that if you have a wall and the wall falls over, the highest point of the wall will fall the farthest from the base. So this world is like the fallen wall, but that the highest level is included in the lowest level. So here, the highest of the four created worlds, Atzilut, is the fire of the altar. And we said the altar is connected to the nefesh, to the animal soul. But that is the service of prayer today, and the service of the temple was to lift up the animal soul, the body, and make it a partner with the highest levels of soul. Because without the body, the soul can't manifest in this world. Then we have the world of Bria. And as we go through the worlds, they become more and more material. So Rav Ginsburg says that the world of Bria, the world of creation, correspond to the fire of Eliyahu, that this eats and drinks. The world of Yetzirah, of formation, the worlds are becoming more material, is the fire of the fever that drinks but doesn't eat. And then the fire of the world of Asiyah, the world of action, is our fire, the fire that burns but can be put out by water. So this obviously is really a brilliant understanding, but it really puts together all the concepts that we've been talking about. The idea of the fire of service, the fire of the soul, the fire that is manifest in the different components of the Mishkan and the temple, and the fire of creation, and how it all is coming from Brit Eish, all coming from fire, from the Shekhinah. God is called an all-consuming fire. And so all of these correspondences obviously take a lot of thought, but the idea is that in our day, they should inspire us that our service in great measure is through prayer. We could add to that just all of the mitzvot is part of the way that we serve God, the way our soul comes close to God, the way we express our longing to come close to God is through doing the mitzvot. And that is our service of God. And we're doing the mitzvot, we're being encouraged to do it with fire, with passion, with longing. I remember many times Reb Shlomo at a concert or sometimes in prayer, if he felt that he hadn't lit everyone up, people were just kind of passive, sometimes he would like very forcefully yell, Chevra, more fire, more fire. He would yell, try to light the fire in our souls. And usually it worked because he did it very passionately. And I remember a number of times davening Kabbalat Shabbat, Reb Shlomo, he couldn't conceive of praying on Shabbos without one's whole being. Ultimately, or ideally, it should be like that all the time. But certainly on Shabbos, so sometimes when he was leading Kabbalat Shabbat, and he felt that people were just not putting their all, I remember like very vividly, he would turn around and he would yell, Chevra, what's going on here? It's Shabbos. What's going on here? More fire. And then he would turn around and continue davening, and like, boy, everyone started davening with fire. That's the deeper meaning of these Torah portions. And I can't emphasize how important it is to see beyond the simple explanations of these animal sacrifices and to understand what it's trying to teach us. And these teachings are eternal. We do not have a Mishkan, we don't have a temple, we don't have animal sacrifices, we don't have an altar. but the ideas and the principles are very much relevant and alive today. So I bless us all to be able to serve God with fire and to be close and to always cling to God.